Welcome to What Matters to People, uncovering stories, trends, and connections that unlock greatness in brands.
Hi there, and welcome back to the podcast called What Matters to People with my good buddy Steve Salby and me, Dave McCocken.
Hey.
This is a podcast we put together where we like to get together some experts and people that are wiser than us to talk about a key subject that we believe is important for marketers, which is to focus on people as opposed to thinking about them as consumers. We've been doing that through this year through a lens of a series of sessions where we've been talking to people about life stages and the different life stages that people go through and what that means in terms of how you reach them, how you talk to them as marketers, etc.
Yeah.
But today, with a little twist, we're still going to come back to the life stage issue, but we wanted to talk about a subject, I guess you, as one of our guests calls it, customer-centricity, and the way in which we have to think about our customers and think about them as human beings, as people, and then how to reach them and get some tips from some much more knowledgeable people than me. So our two guests today are Trevor Gore. Trevor is a longtime partner with Steve in Steve's consultancy. He works as a senior advisor. He's an expert on all things to do with self-care, as he will explain in a minute. And our other guest is Denyse Drummond. Denyse and I have known each other, I think, for about 17 years, which makes me feel like it's a long time. Denyse has an extraordinary background working with a whole bunch of companies. She and I knew each other first when she used to work for Nestle, but for many years now, she's run her own consultancy, which is really focused on customer centrality. So perhaps I could ask them, Steve, to give us a little introduction.
Yeah, no, it's great. And of course, lovely to have you on the show. And this is, I think, really an important one because we've been talking a lot about the different life stages as ways that marketers and companies can start to target the insights around people through different life stages. And of course, these do change, or some of the needs change depending on the categories that they're looking for. And we've talked a lot about healthcare in the past, but depending also on different categories, different needs can evolve through different life stages. So it's wonderful to have Trevor, who, as you said, has been a friend and collaborator with me over the last years. Trevor, could you give us just a potted 30-second overview of your experience?
You know I don't do potted. So started off in community pharmacy way back when, joined a small company at the time called Merrill that became Merrill Dow as a rep, and all was going swimmingly till I presented my very expensive detail aid that the marketing department had worked on to explain why my brand was better than everybody else's. Gone down the tick list of why I got this and the other brand didn't. Doctor nodding all the time. Then at the end I said, so will you recommend this, doctor? And he said, no. I said, but you've agreed we're better than the others. He said, yeah, but I've known the other rep longer. And that was a Damascene conversion for me, that even healthcare professionals make decisions not logically based. So I went away and got a degree in behavioral psychology to understand why people do the strange things they do. Joined a small company called Reckitt and Coleman, which has very many iterations, finished there after 20 years as a global head of pharmacy development. And then ran into you at a conference in Paris. Indeed. And set up my own consultancy and worked. And in the meantime, I've become a trustee and the treasurer, which is their fault, of the Self-Care Forum, looking at why self-care is really important. But also I'm a director of the Institute for Collaborative Working, because I don't think we can do this on our own. We need to collaborate both with patients and brands and healthcare professionals, and you wouldn't set up a factory without knowing the rules. Loads of companies go into collaboration without knowing there's an international standard for collaboration, ISO 44001. So self-care, collaboration and behaviors are my three biggies.
Yeah, very good. And Trevor, if I could also say, there isn't a human being alive on this earth that has trained more pharmacists than anyone else. Trevor is just someone who really deeply understands and has worked with pharmacies all over the world, I have to say. So it's really a unique thing in your experience, Trevor.
Thank you.
All right. And Dave,
Denyse,
introduce Denyse.
the 30-second, tell us.
30 seconds, that's going to be difficult.
Not going to happen, but you know.
I think already my name takes 10 of those. As Steve said, Denyse Drummond-Dunn, I'm President and Chief Growth Catalyst at C3Centricity, which is a global consultancy based here in Switzerland. And over the past 30 years, I've had the privilege of working with companies like Nestle, Coke, Unilever, Carlsberg, and Philip Morris International, which I've had the privilege as a result of working in over 125 countries around the world. So I know consumers around the world, what they want, what they don't want, and how they're changing. And 12 years ago, I set up C3Centricity, and we help CPG companies to attract, delight, and retain more consumers, because after all, that's what we're all about, is trying to, first of all, get people to buy our products and make sure they're happy so they stay with us. And I'm very much an ideas person as well as being international, and I'm constantly writing books, developing processes, and sharing lots of ideas on my various blogs across many websites. So I think what I want to talk about today is, when Dave asked me about Lifestages, I thought, that's interesting because it doesn't apply as much to consumer goods. And when I started looking into it, I realized that it has an impact on so many different categories and industries, but not all of them.
Very well. Yeah. Brilliant, Denyse. Thanks so much. Which probably brings us really nicely to the first question, is that now you've sort of had a look at these life stages across different categories. When you reflect on all of your experience, what's sort of the greatest learning that you've seen about how companies and brands are dealing with people in different life stages? What kind of best practice or worst practice in some cases have you seen?
Well, as I said, I started thinking more about it when I was talking with Dave, because he's the champion of life stage analysis and understanding. And as a result of that, I read a report by Deloitte that said, think about it, that millennials now are thinking far more in terms of experience than products. Therefore, instead of selling our products, we have to sell the whole experience of our products. Whereas baby boomers such as myself and maybe some of the listeners here, we're more concerned about health and wellness. So for me, the most valuable learning about thinking life stages is that, in fact, life stages aren't static. They're fluid, and they're very much dependent upon the context in which we're thinking about it. So if I take, for instance, new parents, they would prioritize maybe safety and convenience, whereas people that are retired, they're probably prioritizing maybe sustainability, certainly simplicity. The world is getting so complicated today that I think that we're all looking to simplify the way we live in this world. So for me, successful brands adapt their message and their offers to meet evolving emotional and practical needs. And obviously that means we have to understand our consumers much better. And one very simple example of that is, of course, P&G. They're very good at understanding their consumers. I love the way that their Pampers brand, for instance, they start off talking about how to look after their newborn, and then they continue the journey with the parents at every stage of the child's development, toddler, and even when they start at school. So I think that builds this long-term, lasting relationship built upon emotions.
Well, it's an interesting one you raised, Pampers, because I won't say who's somebody very close to me in my family does the PR for that brand in a land down under, wherever that might be. And
New Zealand,
yes. And what's interesting to me, of course, is that Pampers, like all their competitors, are now more and more focused on all the life stages.
Yeah.
Because, of course, we had that point a few years ago, I think it was 5 years ago in Japan, where adult diapers started outselling baby diapers. Pampers is now heavily into not only near-death experiences, but people of all ages and their needs for, let's put it, more firmer underwear or something like that, right? Yeah. More absorbent underwear. So it's an interesting thing, because what I've been noticing, Denyse, and as we've gone backward and forward, is categories of all types are having to adapt to the fact that people go through different life stages, and whether you use the same brand or whether you develop different brands for different life stages is, I guess, a strategic issue that different companies make and different decisions are made. But more and more companies are having to start through, do we have something for that life stage? Do we have something for that life stage?
Yeah. And it's interesting what you say, Dave. There's a great example from Unilever, and the brand is Axe or Lynx in some markets. And of course, those of us who know Axe and Lynx, and many of us have grown up with it as young men, will know that it really was the brand that gave us the confidence to go out and get the girl. Effectively around 14, 15 years old, when the hormones are racing and you have no experience in how to talk to girls, but you feel you need to, this was the area that Axe and Lynx really helped you out. But when you got to 21 and you were at university, and you tended to drop it like a hot brick, because you had moved on into a different life stage, and this was a brand for boys, not for men. And Unilever have done very well with it, because really in those teenage years, I think they must have a very strong market share in their target audience. But after that, people move on into another life stage, and it's not relevant to them anymore.
I will say this. I don't know about you, Trevor, but I'm a little bit insulted that Steve implied that the three of us didn't have a clue how to talk to girls when we were teenagers.
I'm amazed he thinks we still do.
Well, let's face it, at our age, it doesn't matter anyway. So,
right, Trev.
I want to build on the Lynx thing.
Your experience, then.
I want to build on the Lynx Axe thing because it's really interesting. I think that this move into life stages versus age is something marketers and brands have battled with forever, but under a different guise. I think it's the difference between quant and qual research. So quant is a number, they like it, they can put it on a spreadsheet, the finance director likes it. What are you talking about adolescence for? Adolescence is 13, but you said it was young boys. I disagree. It's adolescents who used Axe, and that can be 13 to 19.
Sure.
And I think one of the things that Life Stages does is it reflects people's, literally their life stages in a qualitative way, a developmental way, in a subjective way, whereas age is objective. And I think the good brands, if you focus on life stages, you can actually future-proof your brand. So I worked on a brand recently, which, although they weren't allowed to use the hangover word, was a brand for hangovers. Now, if you market it by age, it would have to be over 18s in the UK, over 21s in America, over 16s in some countries. If you market it by when you enjoy your first drink, you can future-proof it whatever comes down the road in terms of legislation. Same for pregnancy. The age of the first pregnancy now in a lot of countries is mid-30s, not mid-20s. If you market it it's for pregnant in your 20s, you don't get it. Yeah. I would say a 20-year-old has more, a pregnant 20-year-old has more in common with a pregnant 30-year-old than they have with another 20-year-old. So it's not the age that gives you the insights and the commonalities. It's the life stage you're on. And one that affects me, I know you can't see below the desk, isn't pregnancy, despite what you're thinking, is I suffer from type 2 diabetes. Actually, I don't. I live with type 2 diabetes. When I was learning my pharmacy all those years ago, it was called maturity onset diabetes. And that immediately leads to stereotyping. Oh, it's for mature people. Whereas we know in most of the developing world now, type 2 diabetes is starting at mid-teens in some countries, but it's come down. So you even to market your product, you need to understand what are the commonalities you're dealing with, and age might not be one of them.
Yeah, very true. I think that's a really good point about the qualitative versus quantitative, because that's going back the 20, 30 years to when Steve was a client of mine 30 years ago, and I used to talk to him about this stuff. Probably when I was boring Denyse, when I used to meet her in Vevey at Nestle's headquarters all those years ago. This qualitative approach has always been much stronger to me. Not denying the use of statistics and demographics, etc., but the truth is, the more you think about it qualitatively, the more you can find an easier way. And because I worked for an ad agency, you have to get it's all about the messaging, right? And the message is much easier if you can think of people going through a particular life stage, particular types of events, etc. But I just want to stop there for a sec, because we've used the term in introducing our guest, customer centricity, and I just want to clarify for the audience what that actually means. Now, and I'm going to ask Denyse to sort of give us or not 30 seconds, Denyse, but, give us the quick grab on what that term really means, because I find it interesting that some people, when I was explaining we were going to do this podcast in the last few days, have said to me, "What's that?" What worried me was 2 of them are fairly senior marketers. So give us the brief.
Great question, Steve, and sorry, Dave, and it's really interesting because I've found over the years that so many people talk about customer centricity, but they don't walk the talk. And I think one of the reasons is that they don't really understand what it is and what to do with it. So because I work generally in CPG, we tend to talk about consumer centricity because customer centricity is the retailer.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about deeply understanding consumer needs. So Trevor was mentioning about qual and quant, and I like to see it as quantitative is the skeleton, but the qualitative is the flesh. And if you want to understand the whole person, you need to get inside their bodies. You need to understand them. Not only who they are, but what their needs are, what their fears are, what their aspirations are, and more importantly than anything, how to adapt your brands to better meet those demands than the competition. Because if your brand doesn't adapt, the way the market is moving so fast today in so many areas, not just technology, sometimes the impact of technology, is that we need to adapt not only our brands, but also our communications. So customer centricity or customer first strategy is really thinking customers rather than brands first.
And I'd like to think that Trevor, knowing what Trevor talks about, right, and listening to, and all jokes aside, listening to Trevor, he's always really interesting. But I suspect that's really a key to your message as well in I guess the pharmacy world, right?
Yes and no. So what I agree with you, Denyse, that a lot of brands say they're customer centric and they're not. One of my ex-employers, and I've told you I only really work for 2 companies. One year they launched a customer centric, and it always starts off with market research tells us. And market research told them that when people have a sore throat, they want a nice cooling sensation. So they launched their brand with the word cool in it. Then the next year, new marketing director, market research told him that when people have a sore throat, they want a warming sensation. So at the same time as they had cool on the shelf, they had warm on the shelf. And I said, I'm getting out before you go for tepid. The reality was the number 1 brand in that portfolio was the one it had been honey and lemon right from the beginning. And so the brands talk consumer centric, and they mean how can we leverage our brand into this consumer centric. I like personalization rather than consumer centric. We in UK healthcare over a decade ago, we started to train pharmacists to stop asking what's the matter with you and to start asking what matters to you. because as Steve said, I've trained tens of thousands of pharmacists in my time. And I always used to say, a headache has never walked into your pharmacy. And they all go, yeah, it's the #1 condition we see. I go, no, a person with a headache's walked into your pharmacy who's worried about their car parked on WL lines, their kids not doing well at school, and their aged parent they're going to put into a home. I'd have a bloody headache as well if I was thinking about that. And we're seeing some really innovative stuff on true personalization. The VMS market's really good at this. I know one company who will look at you, not as a 64-year-old, not as a retiree, but you, Dave, and they'll do 50 measurements of your lifestyle, your diet, your exercise, and they'll build a vitamin pack for you. And it will be unique. It's like a deck of cards. You shuffle a deck of cards, and the likelihood that that exact hand has ever been handed out before is infinitesimally small. And they do that. They can do that with vitamins now. So let's go beyond consumer centric and let's go personalize. Certainly in the medical field, that's where we're trying to get to. Personalize it for you.
Yeah. And no, but that's really interesting what you're saying. And Dave and I are really promoting this idea of life stages, because we want to raise the game when it comes to marketers targeting from, #1, demographics, which in many cases is meaningless, I should say. And it's there because the media agencies are really using demographics as a way of targeting the media strategy, if you like. Then the other one that Dave loves to tell us was absolute BS, which is the Generation X, millennials, etc., thinking that everyone born between certain years will continue to act in that way for the rest of their lives, which of course we know is not true. Now to life stages, which makes a lot more sense, and we can see different needs evolving as people go through their lives. But that still isn't the end of the story, because effectively life stages are completely now open to everyone who will listen to us. And of course, it will make their campaigns and their brands even stronger than they were, but still, it's not competitive. You need to go down to that level of personalization in order that you can emotionally engage with a certain segment of that life stage, right? You can't be for everyone. You have to focus. And I've always told marketers, you've got to think of it as the Pareto principle. 20% of your audience are going to deliver 80% of your value. So stop trying to talk to everyone and start really figuring out emotionally what this person really believes in and needs in order that you can have that relationship with them.
You're so right, Steve. And I know Dave's work on let's stop saying Generation X and Y do this. I was brought up, as I expect you were, that young men drink lager, and as you get older, your palate becomes worse and you go on to bitters and pale ales. It's actually the reverse. Young men start with lager and find out it's tasteless nonsense and go on to something more flavored because they want an experience when they go out for a drink. If you're going to be paying £8-9 for a pint, and you're seeing the marketing of IPAs and boutique beers going really well. The other thing is, and it's bugged me for a long time, and I know Dave has talked about this a lot, the use of social media. Us old farts don't use social media. Oh God, yes, we do. We use it differently, and we use different platforms. So most people of 55 aren't TikToking, but they're Facebooking and YouTubing, because they have a longer span of attention. So they don't want a 10-second thing to get their message over. They want to, and a lot of this started during lockdown, when they wanted to talk to their grandchildren on the other side of the world. And they didn't want to just, hi granny, I'm off. It was, tell me about your day. What have you been doing locked up? So yeah, your life stages do develop, but individually. So I just, this last weekend, joined Blue Sky, the X alternative.
Yeah.
And I was stunned that within 5 minutes of joining it, 6 people of my age had connected with me on there.
Wow, there you go. Denyse, what do you think about that? Trevor and I have ranted on for a few minutes, but tell us what you think.
Okay. I agree. I mean, personalization is important. I would even go further and say that thanks to AI and what's happening today, we're going beyond personalization to hyper-personalization. But I wouldn't forget age, because we've all talked about age. I mean, the example of people aren't having children in their mid-20s, it's now the mid-30s. So you can't do personalization without understanding the customer, the consumer. So I still believe that customer first, consumer first understanding is the baseline for being able to do that personalization or hyper personalization.
Yeah, I don't think I think we're all sort of aligned on that. I think the interesting thing for me has been the exploration the last couple of years of people sort of coming to grips that if you're thinking about people as your consumer, as your customer, as your partner in business, whatever the relationship, you really have to start if you want to reach them, you really have to start thinking about how to reach their heart and their soul, if you like. And of course, in theory, we all know that if you've worked, if you've done it with advertising, that in theory is supposed to always have been true. And whether you read David Ogilvy's books or, Rossiter's books, etc., that will always come through. But what's really happening is, I think some smart marketers are starting to figure out it's more than that. It's about what you do in the store, for example. It's what you do in the pharmacy, in Trevor's case, and the way in which you get across a more human sort of message about these things. Now, I know Denyse, Denyse has published a few books and she's got amazing courses that she runs on all this sort of stuff. How do you start people off? What's the thing that you do when you first start talking to companies about how to become more customer-centric?
Well, as you know, you mentioned the book. So my latest one is Quantum Customer-Centricity, because I realized with winning customer-centricity, people were still based on the traditional approach to customer experience. And what you've just been saying, it's a matter of building relationships, which means understanding the emotional side of a person and understanding their values and making sure that your company, your brand is aligned in terms of what your consumer, your customer values. So when I start working with a client, I tend to go in to find out, first of all, what do they know about their customers? And that's always very interesting because they know, in fact, far more than they realize they know. But unfortunately, the information is dotted around in different departments. So the first thing we tend to do is an information audit. What do you know about your customer and who's got that information? Let's bring it all together. And that way you flesh out that skeleton far more than most people in a company will realize. And then the other thing I do is I look at how they're using that information, because in a lot of cases, we mentioned a lot about market research. I'm not against market research. I'm against companies that think they will get insights about their customers from doing a market research study. A market research or survey, or whether you're buying reports or whatever, is providing data and information. And it's only when you integrate all that to develop the insights that you really get to understand your customers. So I think the information audit and insight development best practices are the two areas that I really help companies with, because it's the foundation, whether it's the company structure, the way the brands are developed, communicated, and innovated, and then, of course, internal processes to integrate the information to build stronger and better brands.
Great point. And by the time this is published, so we're recording this, folks, and it'll take a few days before our great producer Aim actually gets around to publishing this thing, when she clears up my voice problems. But by then I'll have written a little piece that somebody asked me to write, which is the bane of my life the last 10 years has been the overuse of the word insight when people actually meant, well, we found this out. And I know, Trevor, this is like right up your alley, because the greatest cynic I've ever met really sort of erupts when he hears people talking generalization. This is amazing insight. And you go, no, it's a statistic, you know.
Data isn't insights. And in healthcare, I think one of the challenges within healthcare and the healthcare industry is the vast majority of marketeers don't look like me, Dave, or Steve. They look a lot younger. And that's fine, but they're not users of healthcare services. The number of brands and brand managers I've spoken to and said, when did you last go into a pharmacy to see what your customer looks like and see what consumers they're seeing? And they go, oh, the salespeople do that. So they're getting the consumer experience third hand, which is meaningless. I liken it. So at the beginning, I talked about age versus lifestyle is qual versus quant. I think this getting to know your customers is the difference between features and benefits. Is their brand managers, most of them still don't know the difference between a feature and benefit, in my opinion. They say, this is really good, reaches the bones. And it's sort of the problem I'm seeing with data. It gives them sound bites. Yeah. And, you know, in healthcare, we're seeing the huge growth now of real world data, real world evidence being seen as preferable to random controlled trials. You get the random controlled trial to get your license, but you use real world evidence and real world data to see how the bloody thing's used. Steve will remember this. So Gaviscon, Steve, back in the day.
Yes.
It used to come with a little plastic top on top of the bottle so you could measure out your 20 mils. They stopped doing that because somebody brighter went in and saw how they were really used. And you, Denyse, and you, Dave, who have no knowledge of the Gaviscon brand other than what you've seen in the shops, know one of the truths. And I'll provide the other one. Firstly, how do people in the real world take the 20 ml of Gaviscon or any other antacid liquid? How do they do it? Do they measure it out in a spoon? No, they glug from the bottle.
Yeah,
that's how people take their medicine. But the other thing was, so that was the consumers weren't doing what was expected, but the customers, pharmacists were taking the little cap bottle measuring device and using it to measure methadone for their methadone patients. So Reckitt's was spending a fortune on this thing, which didn't meet anybody's needs. And the best example of getting brands and younger people to understand it, I read about, was a brand that was marketing incontinence products. You mentioned incontinence nappies earlier, Dave, and they had a very wise marketing director. And for all his younger people, he would randomly ring them at the weekend, and they would have to find the nearest toilet within 5 minutes. Just so they understood what incontinence really meant, as opposed to looking at the graph and data. And I think that's really intelligent use. Yeah. And I one of the things I try and teach people is please co-create with your consumers. Don't test, don't develop a product or a service and then say, do you like this? Do it the other way around, saying what is missing in your life? What would you like to see more of? Most brands think they start with the answer and need them verified with the customer. It's the other way around. Start with the customer and verify it later.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, Trev. I think one thing which I think we have to take responsibility for as senior people in our companies was that we used our marketeers to analyze data. You know, young marketeers go in there and what's the first thing we give them? We give them the data. We give them, when it was in books and pages, we give them huge sheafs of paper and we tell them to go through it. Or now they have to go through it on an Excel spreadsheet. And so we valued that analysis of the numbers. But actually getting insight isn't an analytical problem. It's an emotional challenge. And that's where we're now asking to do something very different. So people logically get it, that they need to go deeper into why the data is saying certain things and what understanding they can get from that, and then what people are feeling, believing, and valuing. But it's really difficult for young marketers because A, they don't have the life experience, as you quite rightly said. B, we haven't really trained them. And when we tell them to go and get insights, we tell them to read a piece of market research to get the insights. So Denyse, absolutely, really love what you're doing, because I do also believe that within most companies, 90% of the data is there available. It just needs to be brought together and then effectively mined for insight. But I do, and I'm sure you do as well, add one more thing to that when I get the teams to look for insights. I get them to go out and talk to people. Talk to their family and friends who are within the target group, or who are perhaps using the product, or maybe even not using the product, and basically talk to them about their lives and what's important to them in their lives. And then when they come along back to the workshops, they bring with them that emotional data, if you like, that intuition that actually helps them to decipher the data in a much more emotional way.
Absolutely, that's one of the other steps in the process that I work with, and I'm very interested that Trevor was saying that young people today don't have the data, they don't have the connection with the consumer, and I suppose that's why I did when I was working in Gillette. I actually, the brand managers were out one day a week in the retail outlets and talking to consumers and purchasers. Most brand managers don't get out one day a year now. Yeah. And what I did a lot of in Nestle was we actually would give people a budget and say, okay, you're a family of 4 and somebody's diabetic, go and buy for the evening meal. And they would literally have a budget, they would go out. And as a result, they would be looking at packs, they would be comparing their products to competitive products. And then when they came back, they would explain why they bought the products they did. And I think that getting people to use the products that their company makes is absolutely vital. I mean, when I worked in Philip Morris, I have to say I didn't smoke, but in fact, it was a positive because it meant that I had to listen more to smokers because I wasn't one myself. So I think in the past, we spent far more time out talking to consumers than we do today. And that's something that I try to bring back in all my client engagements from the CEO down. And quite often they're not happy to start with, but once they've done it, they can't get enough of it. But a word of warning, they need briefing. Yes. Because you don't want them talking to the customer or the consumer as the CEO of the company or even the marketer. They have to be listeners, not confirming hypotheses or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Great point.
Good.
There's nothing worse than when you get a senior person from a company going out and meeting people in the street, but actually what they're trying to do is look for compliments and avoid complaints, you know. So
and yet complaints are a gift.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You know, 1 in 20 to 1 in 30 people will complain. The others will just leave. So be thankful for complaints and value them and value the consumer or the customer that took their time to tell you why they're unhappy. But you have to take it on board. I remember in Nestle, the R&D department were measured on the number of problems they solved. And they obviously wanted the number of complaints to go down, so they would only accept complaints when they got the return of the product. And what happened was there was 1 complaint on baby formula, and the mothers never returned the product because they found a solution because it wouldn't dissolve well. They were using a whisk to dissolve it. So they didn't return the product, and R&D ended up not working on the number 1 problem, but in fact the number 3 problem, because the products weren't being returned as we found a solution.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent.
Good. And that's a really good example of the real world data, the real world evidence, and it can become a problem for really successful brands. So Steve and I used to actually visit people's homes, and I'll give you a medical example and a non-medical example. So market research said that Lemsip was the number 1 brand, and everyone said, yeah, we take Lemsip for a cold. Yeah. It's the hot lemon paracetamol based drink. And then you'd go into people's houses and say, you said, show me your Lemsip. And it was Beecham's. It was Unichem's own label. Lemsip had become the generic term for a hot lemon drink. And the other one I like is sometimes you get caught up in your own hubris. Do you know what the most popular cola beverage is in UK pubs? And I suspect pubs around the world. So got quite a long name.
Cola-based beverage.
Yeah.
No, go on, tell us.
It's Pepsi. Is that okay?
Oh,
Ask for a Bacardi and Coke, and they say it's Pepsi. Is that okay?
And by the way, by the way, Trev, as everybody that knows me knows, that's the point when I turn around and leave the pub.
Yes,
because it's not okay.
Absolutely.
You never drink
Absolutely.
Pepsi under any
you're
circumstance.
1 in 100, Dave. You have this addiction, and wonderful addiction, towards one Coca-Cola a day, and it's got to be a Coke. And I think, Trevor, you have the same with Diet Coke, I think, right?
I've during COVID and lockdown, I did migrate to a very specific Pepsi Max ginger flavor, which was gorgeous, but they stopped doing it as soon as it was over. So I'm back to Diet Coke, but Diet Coke lime flavored now. I'm nothing if not experimental.
Oh, Mr. Radical. Well, with that, great discussion, guys. Can we finish up by just asking the two of you just to give us 3 little points that you think will make a difference to marketers as they think about this subject area going forward? Denyse, what have you got?
Okay, my 3 points. Well, obviously the first one has to be to listen proactively, because we've just been talking about that. But that doesn't have to be only going out and visiting stores or visiting people in their homes, because today we have social listening, and you can even listen into care centers. So there's a way of listening proactively, not just looking for confirmation, and doing it even from your desk. So I would say that would be the number one, to get to know your customers better. Number 2 is empowering your teams within your organization, because as I mentioned earlier, everybody has information about your customer. It's not often shared, and you need to empower your teams to share information and also to develop insights together. As I mentioned earlier, insights don't come from one piece of market research. They come from improving your understanding of your customer, their life stage, what their dreams, desires are. And the third one, we live in a fast world, so act fast. Be agile. I always remember, probably you do too, the Oreos ad when the lights went out in the Super Bowl. And within a few minutes, they were tweeting, power out, no problem, you can still dunk in the dark. So they knew their consumers were there. They felt this connection because they felt their problem. They were in the dark, but they also added some humor by saying, well, you can still dunk in the dark, so things aren't as bad as you think they are. I think all those examples are customer centricity, customer understanding. And if you understand your customers well, you'll be with them where they need you.
Excellent. Trevor.
First tip would be see the whole person, not just the bit you're interested in. We tend to segment by disease process, and certainly in healthcare, we sometimes forget the why people are presenting. Question I ask every brand team I ever work with, and they all get it wrong, is what's the first thing a person does when they get a headache, a stomach ache, sore throat, a common ailment? And they always say they go on Dr. Google or they rush to the pharmacy. No, they don't. They do nothing because they've had it before. They think it'll go away. They won't treat it for a couple of days. They'll grab the old lozenge out the back of the medicine cabinet that's a bit furry. Just think how much you could grow your categories and your brands and help people if they treated their condition earlier and for the correct amount of time. The sore throats, most people will buy a pack of 24 lozenges, take 8 a day and stop taking it after day 3 when it should be after day 5 to 7. So see the whole person and understand their life. Secondly, co-create with people. Observe what people do in the real world. I've got a brilliant picture that I know Steve's seen before. There's a line in Jurassic Park, life will find a way, and so will the consumers. And it's a picture of a park where the pavement goes around the corner of the grass, but everyone's just cut across because that's what people do. There's a Ohio State University in America. They didn't build the paths till they saw the journey people went on, and built the paths where people were walking. Really intelligent thinking. Linked to sort of intelligent thinking, get involved in behavioral science. Most of the decisions you make every day are full of biases and mistakes. We're subject to, the second you say, why I corrected myself earlier when I said I'm living with diabetes. Second I say diabetic, your brain does all sorts of contortions that probably aren't true. He doesn't do this, he doesn't do that, he can't do that, he can't do that. There are about 100 cognitive biases we all make all the time, and just understanding them reframes are brilliant. Being a diabetic, every now and again I do enjoy a meal from a burger chain that uses a clown as its logo, and they're brilliant at reframes. They wouldn't give you a sugar-laden drink, fat-loaded potatoes and processed meat for your little darling baby kid. No, they'll sell them a Happy Meal left, right and center. And how we use words and frame things in marketing, we're not very good at it. We focus on the downside. All the stats tell us people are risk averse rather than pleasure seeking, but we say our product will make you feel better rather than if you don't stop doing this, you'll feel worse. Smoking cessation is a great example. We talk about the benefits of living longer, not the benefits of dying earlier, or the risks of dying earlier. Risks of dying earlier. So look at the person, not the symptom, co-create and get involved in behavioral economics.
Great points. Thank you very much. Denyse, I know that you wanted to make a little offer to our audience. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Yeah, I don't know if you do this very often because I haven't listened to too many of the episodes. They're so fascinating. I wanted to immediately take action on what I was hearing. But if anybody would like, I'm offering a free CX business makeover call. And anybody that signs up at they can contact me, info@c3centricity.com, and hopefully you'll put that in the notes. I'll offer a free copy of my new book, which is QC2 Beyond CX.
All right. Well, thank you so much to both of you. It's been a pleasure. And I'm sure we could continue this conversation for many more hours, and I hope we will. It may be in other ways, face to face, if we can. So thank you again. I think we've gone into the topic of life stages and the implications for customer centricity. Hopefully that's given some inspiration to the audience. And of course, if there's any questions, and please come back to Denyse with your requests. But I think it's been a pleasure, and thank you very much. Dave.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. It's been great catching up with both of you, Trevor and Denyse. Good to see you on screen. Hope to see you in the flesh soon. Thanks again, Steve. Thanks everybody else, and we'll see you on our next podcast, which will be in the new year. So happy Christmas and happy New Year to everybody in the audience. Cheers.
Okay. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve, Dave, and Trevor.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to What Matters to People. Subscribe, share, and join the conversation. Until next time.